Who's ready for another brand analysis video? Squier is a guitar brand that is often misunderstood. Personally, I'm a big fan of Squier guitars, so while I'm not part of the group that hates them, I can understand the reasons why they may be disliked. So tonight, I'm here to clear a few things up. So let me start off with a brief introduction of Squier guitars. Squier, the company, started off as the VC Squier company in the late 1800s, selling strings for banjos, guitars, and violins. In 1965, the VC Squier company was acquired by Fender, who defunctionalized the company around 10 years later and kept selling the strings under the Fender name. In 1982, Squier was brought back to life and established as Fender's low-end guitar brand, selling the same shapes that were known from Fender, but with lower-end components, which is how we know Squier today. Squier was essentially only reactivated because Fender was overwhelmed by the amount of cheap Japanese copies of their designs, so they needed an outlet, a way to compete. Now to the meat of the video. Why to this day do Squier guitars still get a bad rap? Because frankly, having tried a lot of them, I find that to be anything but justified. Well, it's because to this day, people still approach low-end guitars with the wrong mindset. Without even buying them, they look at an inexpensive guitar and just assume that it sucks. Why? Because for a while, most low-end guitars, even including Squiers, did suck. But in the late 80s to early 90s, Korean-made Squier guitars were the shit, and they're highly sought after guitars today by people who are in on the secret. My old guitar teacher has this baby blue Squier Strat, and he never knew what year it was from or why it was so good. He assumed it was like mid-2000s until I looked up the serial number for him and found out that it was a Korean-made one from the early 90s, which explains why it's so good, because basically anything that came from Korea in the 90s was incredible. There was merely a period in the 2000s, a decade that brought with it many youngsters trying to get into guitar to learn pop-punk riffs, where Squiers, much like other budget guitar brands like Harley Benton, sucked real ass. But today, both Squier and, for example, Harley Benton are as good as it gets if you want a great cheap bang-for-buck guitar or a very worthy mod platform. Another factor is that people may associate the entire Squier name with their Affinity or Bullet series guitars, which, side note, also don't deserve all of the hate that's directed at them. I have the remainders of one right here. It was my first guitar, and while I was perfectly happy with it as my first guitar, in retrospect, it's only really good as a mod platform. It's also in very poor condition right now and stripped of all hardware and electronics, which, by the way, someone did buy off me on eBay, so clearly they don't suck that much. And yes, this will become a mod project someday, that's why I still own it. I, as a die-hard Fender fanboy, huge surprise, I know, have no problem admitting that the higher end of Squier guitars are slowly but surely becoming just as good as their Mexican-made Fender counterparts. I mean, if you look at the hierarchy of Squier and Fender products, it goes Squier, Bullet, Affinity, Contemporary, and Classic Vibe, the most expensive Squier guitars, followed by the cheapest Fender guitars, the Player series, which are Mexican-made, and then come the American ones in different price ranges. So price-wise, between the most expensive Squier and the cheapest Fender, there's maybe €100 difference, if that. And Squiers are more modern at that. I mean, look at these finishes and these specs. Roasted maple neck and fretboard, genuine Floyd Rose branded tremolo, not licensed, Floyd Rose branded, and this stunning shell pink finish, for instance, all for under €400. That is insane. This entire run of guitars is nuts. At this point, the people behind Squier are innovating more than Fender. Which makes sense if you think about it, because Fender is an OG, bona fide old man brand, and old men don't like their shit being tampered with. Whereas I think it's safe to say that the demographic for Squier guitars is usually a slightly younger one. So there's a lot of room to experiment with active humbuckers, roasted maple, funky pickup combinations and shapes, all in the weirdest combinations possible. Like this contemporary active Starcaster, a classic old school shape from the 70s, but given a fresh twist with a roasted maple neck and active humbuckers. I find this one especially exciting because the Starcaster is a lovely shape that when introduced by Fender in the mid-70s didn't sell at all and was discontinued again by 1980. That just wasn't the time for it, but now is. And it has now been brought back just with a few tweaks to make it appeal to today's modern guitar player. Fender wouldn't do that. They wouldn't bring back a shape from the 70s and chuck active humbuckers in it. They do this for like select signature artists like Jim Root. Jim Root has his signature Telecaster with active EMGs in it, which I despise so much I could make an entire series about how much and why I hate it. But this is not the place for that. The point is, Squier is just kind of the outlet for Fender's creative ideas that wouldn't really appeal to the Fender audience. There's also the Squier Paranormal series, which is a perfect example of this. It's weird in the best ways possible. I love it. Another interesting thing is that Squier makes quite a few guitars that look eerily similar to some Fender artist signature models. Take this classic vibe 70s Strat for instance. The finish, the big headstock, the maple fretboard. This could so easily be upgraded and scalloped and that way turned into an Yngwie Malmsteen tribute guitar for about as much money in upgrades as the guitar itself costs. Or this red 50s tribute Strat. Remind you of anything? I've brought a lot of my points across by now, but now to the main event of today's video. As you can tell, I bought a few Squiers, as I do for this series. I did that for the BC Rich video, for the Schecter one, and for this one. Because I don't like to make claims without the ability to back them up. A Squier Contemporary Strat in a Skyburst metallic finish, and a Squier 40th Anniversary Jazzmaster in Lake Placid Blue. Roll the close-ups. I chose these two particular guitars because to me they're exactly what I would look for in a modern rendition of these classic designs. This Jazzmaster features a nice and hefty poplar body, an Indian laurel fretboard, 21 frets, a bone nut, this gold anodized aluminium pickguard, yes this is metal, and two of the thickest and creamiest sounding Fender designed Alnico P90s that you've heard. Check them out. The Strat also features a poplar body, a roasted maple neck and fretboard. May I remind you, this is currently going for under €400. A big black lacquered CBS headstock, I love that. A graphite nut, 22 frets, 3 modern Squier Alnico single coils in what's a modern take on the classic Strat single coil layout, a 3-ply pickguard, and a black 2-point floating tremolo. Not to mention this stunning metallic skyburst finish which really does not come across on camera. Check it out compared to one of my old expensive Strats. Those both sounded incredible, and you cannot deny that. So let's do more of an in-depth analysis on these guitars. First of all, probably genuinely, and this is not a joke, the smoothest fret edges I've ever felt out of the factory. If you're new to the channel, I call this the balloon test, and it's how I test sharpness on fret edges. Not even a scratch. Nothing. It's like the frets are not there. Hey, Schecter, Squier can do it for a third of the price and their finishes don't feel grainy. I could find very few negatives. However, one of them is the neck dive on this Strat, because while this is also a poplar body like on the Jazzmaster, it's not hefty whatsoever. In fact, it weighs nothing. The neck is heavier and therefore, But this only really becomes a problem when you're playing with a strap. If I'm playing either in classical position or like this, nothing. It's only when the guitar is strapped to me that it will go And that pretty much sums up the issues I have with this Strat. It is genuinely near perfect. I'm sending these guitars back to Toman after the video is finished. I only bought them to test them out. But you can rest assured I will buy this one again for myself someday. Now to the Jazzmaster. You may have noticed this piece of masking tape. Why is that where it is? Because otherwise these strings back here ring out so unbelievably loud, you cannot hear what you're actually playing. It's all just sympathetic ringing from behind the bridge. But besides that sympathetic ringing, which is easily fixed as you can see with masking tape or a piece of foam, and these vintage style tuners which I just kind of find a bit outdated, this is genuinely the best way to get the most authentic Jazzmaster experience possible if you're on a budget. Like, these P90s are made to Fender spec. This is not cheap garbage. Still not convinced by Squier because you're so set in your ways? Well, many well-known artists use Squiers at least partially, and I will bet that you had no idea. Mark Knopfler, George Harrison, Jeff Healey, Slash with the now very rare pink Hello Kitty Strat, Pete Wentz of Fall Out Boy, who I believe even has a signature Squier bass, and a lot more if you do some research. So now, if you still do not believe me that Squier guitars are the absolute tits, I don't know what will convince you. Thank you so much for watching. You can watch other videos from my brand analysis series somewhere up here. You can subscribe to my channel somewhere down there if you feel like it. I'd be honored. All my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. I'll see you next Saturday.